On a stormy night in Charleston, 1831, two women gave birth just hours apart. One a French countess, the other her enslaved servant. By dawn, both cribs were empty, replaced with children who weren't their own. What followed was a 34-year web of lies, forged papers, and murders that nearly toppled one of the South's richest families. And when the truth finally surfaced, it exposed a secret network of deceptions across the antebellum South. History tried to bury this story in flames, but tonight we're bringing it back. Imagine this. A foggy Charleston night, 1831. Two women, one a French countess, the other her enslaved servant, went into labor just hours apart inside one of the city's grandest mansions. By sunrise, both cribs were empty, and in their place, two children who weren't who they were supposed to be. Those babies would grow up inheriting fortunes, titles, and influence that by blood they had no claim to. What followed? A deception so tangled it stretched across 3 decades, papers forged, secrets silenced, murders covered up. And when it finally came crashing down in 1865, the truth didn't just ruin one of the South's richest families. It exposed a hidden web of similar schemes running through the entire antebellum South. But here's the catch. Almost every trace of what really happened, letters, court documents, testimonies, was swallowed by a mysterious fire in 1923. So what you're about to hear is the chilling reconstruction of a story that history tried to erase. Before we dive deeper into the deadly pact of Countess Margot de Villefort, hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love connecting with fellow dark history fans across America. It's your support that helps us uncover forgotten stories like this one. Now, let's set the stage. Charleston in 1831 wasn't just another southern city. It was the glittering crown of the South. Cobblestone streets, moss-draped oaks, and mansions the size of castles where the cotton aristocracy lived like royalty. One of the grandest was the Peton estate, spanning an entire block on East Bay Street. 3 floors of Georgian brick looking out at the harbor, where ships unloaded European luxuries for Charleston's wealthiest families. The master of the house, Colonel Harrison Peton, was a 3rd-generation plantation baron. At 52, he controlled 3,000 acres of rice and cotton fields, and the lives of hundreds of enslaved people who worked them. He was respected in Charleston society, sat on the city council, and threw parties that dazzled visiting dignitaries. But despite all his power, it wasn't Colonel Peton who turned heads in Charleston. It was his wife, Countess Margot de Villefort, a young French aristocrat who had fled the upheavals of France just 3 years earlier. At 28, she was striking, porcelain skin, amber eyes, perfect posture. She spoke 4 languages, played piano so beautifully that Charleston matrons would hush just to listen, and carried herself with a grace that made every other plantation wife seem provincial. She didn't come alone. By her side was Celeste, her personal attendant, mixed race, sharp-eyed, and unusually educated. Celeste could read and write both French and English, a rare gift among enslaved women, one the Countess herself had taught her during the voyage across the Atlantic. Her light complexion and refined features often caused visitors to mistake her for free, a mistake Margot never corrected. From the outside, the Peton household looked like a picture of European elegance transplanted to the Carolina coast. But behind those mansion doors, the dynamics were far darker. Colonel Peton, like many planters of his rank, had what society politely called plantation habits. His late-night visits to the slave quarters were whispered about in Charleston drawing rooms, but never acknowledged openly. Everyone knew what those habits meant, and soon his eye turned to Celeste. Educated, beautiful, and always close by, she was different from the other women in the house. What began as translation help in his study stretched later and later into the night. By autumn of 1830, the whispers in the slave quarters weren't whispers anymore. Meanwhile, Countess Margot found companionship of her own. Dr. Jean-Baptiste Rousseau, another French exile, this one a physician with radical ideas he wisely kept hidden in Charleston. Officially, he treated the Countess's nervous conditions. Unofficially, his visits stretched for hours, conducted in rapid French that nobody else in the house understood. And when Margot emerged from those sessions, the melancholy in her eyes was gone, replaced by something brighter. By the end of the year, the truth was impossible to ignore. Both women, Margot and Celeste were pregnant. Margot announced hers proudly. Charleston society celebrated the news of a long-awaited heir to the Peton fortune. Colonel Peton made the right speeches about his joy, but privately seemed distracted with business matters. Celeste's pregnancy was handled differently. Such things were common enough that they caused little gossip. Margot explained to her husband that Celeste would need lighter duties for a while, then arranged for her to live in a cottage on the grounds with care from Mama Ruth, the elderly midwife who had delivered generations of Charleston children, both enslaved and free. But as the due dates drew closer, an unease settled over the mansion. The two women began meeting in hushed conversations. The staff noticed Margot taking long walks to Celeste's cottage, her face tight with anxiety. Everyone sensed something was off, but no one dared to ask, because here's the truth. Both pregnancies carried devastating secrets. Margot's child wasn't her husband's. Celeste's child was. If either truth came out, everything would collapse. Margot would be ruined socially, cast out in disgrace. Celeste would be sold away from her baby, as so many enslaved women had been before her. And so, a plan began to take shape. The storm that struck Charleston on March 15, 1831, seemed almost too fitting. Lightning split the sky, winds ripped through the oaks, rain battered the city. Merchant ships strained at their anchors as waves pounded the seawall. Inside the mansion, Margot clutched the bedpost, her labor pains intensifying. Dr. Rousseau arrived near midnight, soaked and anxious, rushing upstairs to her chambers. Colonel Peton waited downstairs in his study, as Southern tradition dictated, far away from the messy business of childbirth. In the small cottage outside, Celeste writhed in labor too, biting down on leather to silence her cries, attended only by Mama Ruth. Two women, less than 50 yards apart. Two labors unfolding in the same storm-tossed night. Mama Ruth moved between them with the calm of someone who had seen it all before. Births that changed families, births that erased them. She alone grasped the gravity of what this night meant, and when dawn finally broke, and the storm began to fade, the first of the two children entered the world. What happened next would change everything. And that's where we'll pick up in the next chapter of this unbelievable story. If you want to hear how Countess Margot and Celeste's fates became bound in blood, lies, and betrayal, make sure you're subscribed, drop a like, and share this video with someone who loves dark history. Trust me, you don't want to miss what comes after this night. Picture this. The storm has barely passed, and inside a candlelit room, Dr. Rousseau holds a newborn girl in trembling hands. One look at her olive skin and dark hair, and he knows. This isn't Colonel Peton's heir. This is his own child. She's beautiful, he whispers in French, his voice heavy with dread, because he also knows that if the colonel sees this baby, everything will unravel. Meanwhile, across the courtyard, Mama Ruth delivers Celeste's child, a boy. Pale skin, the sharp Peton nose that 3 generations had carried before him. The resemblance is unmistakable. Ruth had delivered the colonel himself 3 decades earlier. And here was the same bloodline, staring back at her in a newborn face. By sunrise, both women faced the same impossible truth. Margot's child could never pass as her husband's. Celeste's son, born into slavery, would never be allowed to claim his birthright. So, what do you do when every choice leads to ruin? It was Dr. Rousseau who finally said it out loud. The colonel expects a son, he murmured. If he sees this child, everything collapses. Margot's eyes filled with tears. I know what you're suggesting, Jean-Baptiste. But how could we even... That's when Mama Ruth stepped in. Her weathered face appeared in the doorway, her voice steady with the kind of authority only age and experience could bring. There is a way, she said quietly. Both babies can live. But they can't stay where they were born. The air seemed to freeze. Celeste's boy could be presented as the Countess's heir. The Countess's girl could be raised as Celeste's daughter. It was monstrous. It was unthinkable, and yet, it was the only solution that protected them all. The bargain was struck. Dr. Rousseau would alter the records, officially noting only one birth, a healthy son of Colonel and Countess Peton. Celeste would claim the girl as her own. And Margot? She would raise a child that wasn't her. Before the colonel returned from inspecting storm damage, the switch was made. Mama Ruth swaddled both infants, her steady hands making the deception look natural. The Countess held the boy, Celeste's son, and already he seemed to fit perfectly into the role of heir. But when she glanced at Celeste cradling the baby girl who was truly hers, Margot felt something dangerous stir inside, a desperate protectiveness that would only grow stronger over the next 3 decades. This wasn't just a switch. It was the beginning of a lifelong performance. For the next few years, the lie held. Colonel Peton welcomed his son, naming him Charles Harrison Peton. Visitors admired his fair skin, his strong features, his uncanny resemblance to the colonel's own father. The family's legacy seemed secure, and yet the Countess could never quite let go of the daughter she had secretly lost. She named her Marie and demanded that the little girl be educated alongside Charles, an unusual move that raised eyebrows. Her excuse? That her son needed a companion. Whispers spread. That Frenchwoman spoils her house slaves beyond all reason, society ladies murmured over tea. But no one dared confront her directly. Dr. Rousseau, still posing as the family physician, became a fixture at the mansion, quietly keeping their secret alive. He monitored the children, ready to explain away any suspicious resemblances or traits that might betray the truth. And then came the first crack in their carefully built world. At just 5 years old, Charles proved frighteningly intelligent. He read far ahead of his peers, mastered numbers with ease, even showed a gift for music that rivaled his mother's. But intelligence brings questions. "Why don't I look like Cousin Edmund?" Charles asked one day. "His hair is darker. His skin tans. Mine doesn't." Margot's heart nearly stopped. "You take after your father's family," she said smoothly. But Charles wasn't satisfied. His questions kept coming. Even worse, he seemed deeply bonded to Marie. The 2 children finished each other's sentences, shared secrets without speaking. Almost as if some invisible thread tied them together, Celeste lived with constant heartbreak. She could never call Charles her son, though she found quiet ways to guide him, slipping in advice, protecting him from plantation cruelties, shaping his mind in secret. Her daughter Marie she loved fiercely. But every privilege Charles enjoyed, wealth, education, freedom, was what Marie was denied. The irony was bitter, and as for the Countess, her protectiveness turned into obsession. She micromanaged lessons, picked their friends, even eavesdropped on childish conversations, terrified that truth would leak out. Her health began to falter under the weight of vigilance. Dr. Rousseau saw it all. The trembling hands, the watchful eyes, the unspoken bond between 2 children who didn't know they had been switched at birth, and Charleston society. They started to notice too. Not enough to guess the truth, but enough to whisper, enough to wonder the deception was holding. But cracks were beginning to show. And this, my friends, was only the beginning of a deception that would span 34 years. So, what happens when lies built in candlelight face the harsh glare of truth? What happens when the heirs of one of Charleston's greatest dynasties discover their lives are built on a stolen birthright? Stick with us, because the fallout from this secret is even darker than the storm that began it. What if protecting one child meant sacrificing another? That's the choice Countess Margot Peton faced in Charleston, 1837. And the decision she made that night would haunt her forever. Rumors were already swirling through Charleston society. That Frenchwoman spoils her slaves, especially that light-skinned girl. Mark my words, it'll end in disaster. Those whispers finally reached Colonel Peton, and for the first time since their marriage, he started to doubt his wife. One evening, in the dark-paneled study, he confronted her. "Margot, I've been hearing disturbing reports," he said sharply. "Particularly about that mulatto girl you've taken such a liking to." The Countess froze inside, but on the outside, she was calm, polished, every inch the aristocrat. "Marie is bright," she answered smoothly. "I thought Charles might benefit from having her as a companion, someone to study with, someone to keep him company." The colonel's reply was ice cold. "Educated slaves become rebellious slaves, and there's talk in town about your unusual attachments. Our family name is at stake, Margot." The warning was unmistakable. One wrong move, and the entire facade she'd built around her son could come crashing down. That night, alone in her chamber, the Countess made a decision that shattered her heart. She summoned Celeste and whispered the words no mother ever wants to hear. Marie must be sold. Celeste's face went pale. "You promised she'd be protected," she whispered. "And she will be," Margot insisted. though tears streamed down her cheeks. "I'll send her to a family in Savannah. She'll be safe, cared for, even educated. But if she stays here, my husband will grow suspicious, and then everything will unravel." The cruel irony was unbearable. To protect Charles's inheritance, the Countess had to send away her own daughter. Celeste knew the logic was airtight, but it didn't stop her from breaking inside. The sale was arranged in secret, through intermediaries, with money exchanged under the table. On paper, Marie was just another house slave, spoiled by indulgence. In truth, she was a child torn away from both her mothers. On the day she left, hidden in the back of a merchant's wagon, both women stood at separate windows, watching her disappear down the oak-lined road. Margot gripped the sill so hard her knuckles turned white. Celeste's shoulders shook with silent sobs. And Charles? He ran after the wagon until a coachman pulled him back, screaming, "Bring back my sister! She's not a slave, she's my sister!" His cries echoed through the neighborhood, leaving other families whispering about the strange Peton household. The years after Marie's departure changed everything. Charles was never the same. At just 7 years old, he sank into a quiet melancholy. He ate little, spoke less, and lost interest in the games of childhood. Yet his mind grew sharper than ever. By 8, he had mastered Latin. By 9, he was debating legal arguments far beyond his years. But beneath that brilliance lurked something dangerous, an uncanny gift for sniffing out lies. The Countess poured all her energy into shaping him, tutors, lessons, endless supervision. But in her obsession, she forgot one thing. Charles was studying her just as carefully. One morning, he asked in that piercing way only a child can, "Mother, why do you watch me so closely when you think I'm not looking? You act like you're afraid I'll disappear. And sometimes you look sad when you see me. Why do I make you sad?" Margot's mask almost cracked. Meanwhile, Celeste rose to head housekeeper, using her position to quietly track Marie's life in Savannah. Through whispered networks of enslaved messengers, she learned the girl was well treated, and showing the same frightening intelligence as Charles. Dr. Rousseau remained their constant shadow, no longer just a physician, but a counselor, warning them of the danger that loomed ahead. "Charles is too observant," he told Margot in 1839. "He will uncover the truth sooner than you think," and he was right. The summer of 1840, Charles stumbled upon something that changed everything. In the mansion's library, tucked among his mother's papers, he found a letter. A letter from Dr. Rousseau, written after the children's birth. It spoke of a delicate arrangement, an exchange that must never be exposed, and one line made his blood run cold. "Regarding Marie, the other child in our agreement." That evening at dinner, Charles fixed his gaze on his parents and asked, "What exchange were you and Dr. Rousseau discussing in your letter about Marie and me?" The silence was unbearable. The colonel looked baffled. The Countess felt her entire world tilt, and Celeste, standing at the table, knew catastrophe had arrived. "I don't know what you mean, darling," Margot said finally, her voice trembling under forced composure. But Charles wasn't fooled. "You do know," he whispered. "And one day, I'll find out what really happened the night I was born." That chilling promise, spoken by a 9-year-old boy, sent shivers through everyone in the room. From that moment on, Charles wasn't just a gifted child. He became a threat to the very lie that had built the Peton dynasty, and this was only the beginning. So what happens when a boy who can see through lies decides to uncover his own? When the secret of his birth collides with the legacy of one of Charleston's most powerful families? The storm was coming, and no one in that house was ready for it. What happens when a child is smart enough to uncover the very secret that created him? By 1841, that was the terrifying question hanging over the Peton household. Charles was no ordinary boy anymore. At just 10 years old, he wasn't just curious, he was investigating. He studied family portraits, searching for resemblances. He pressed the house slaves for stories about the night he was born. He even tried writing to distant relatives in France to uncover his mother's past. And when his questions grew too sharp for anyone else, they often landed on one person, Celeste. The woman who was secretly his real mother. One afternoon, he cornered her. "Miss Celeste," he said politely, the way he'd been taught. "Do you remember anything strange the night I was born?" Her heart pounded, but her face was calm. She'd had years to practice that. "It was a terrible storm," she said carefully. "Worst I ever saw. Trees falling, rain like Judgment Day, but Charles wasn't satisfied. And Marie? Do you remember anything about her being born around the same time? That question lingered like smoke. Celeste forced a steady tone. Lots of babies come during storms. But I was just helping Mama Ruth. It wasn't my place to pay attention. Charles studied her face with those eyes that mirrored her own. You liked Marie a lot, didn't you? More than most folks like slave children. Celeste allowed a crack of truth to slip through. She was a sweet child. Anyone would have loved her. I still dream about her, Charles said softly. Dreams where she isn't really your daughter at all, but something else. Someone else. The conversation ended there, but Celeste knew. His subconscious was pulling at threads his intellect hadn't fully unraveled yet, and that terrified her. As if that weren't enough, outside pressures were mounting. Colonel Peton's health was failing. Charleston society began watching Charles more closely, expecting him to step into the role of future master. That meant more scrutiny, more questions, and less room for mistakes. And then came news from Savannah. Marie, now 10 years old, was astonishing the Carrington family with her brilliance. She was so gifted they were considering sending her north for schooling. Imagine that, an enslaved girl being offered advanced education. If that happened, Marie might someday gain the tools and the allies to uncover her true past. 2 children, both brilliant, both searching for answers, and both connected by a secret that could burn the entire Peton legacy to the ground. By 1842, the secret was cracking. Charles, now 11, had transformed into something formidable. Not just intelligent, strategic. He wasn't asking childish questions anymore. He was conducting investigations. The breaking point came when he noticed something odd about Dr. Russo. The physician kept 2 journals, one for official records and another private. One autumn afternoon, Charles slipped into Russo's study and found it. Inside, he uncovered everything. Detailed notes about the infants, references to the exchange, payments, from the Countess to keep the truth buried. It was all there, proof of the conspiracy, but that wasn't even the most chilling part. The later entries revealed a doctor on the edge of collapse. Russo wrote of drinking too much, of paranoia, of guilt. The boy suspects everything, one line read. His questions grow sharper each month. I fear his intelligence will destroy us all. The Countess speaks now of measures that even I fear. And there were letters from Savannah, questions about Marie's features, her resemblance to European ancestry. She was becoming harder to explain away as a slave child. Charles carefully copied the damning passages, slid the journal back, and walked out with a weapon more powerful than any sword. That night, he confronted the Countess. I know about the exchange, he said flatly, placing the papers before her. Marie was your daughter. I am the son of a slave. The Countess felt her world collapse, but she didn't crumble. Her voice stayed calm. If you truly understand what you've read, then you know what revealing it would cost us both. Charles thought carefully. You'd be disgraced, cast out. I'd lose everything. Inheritance, education, even freedom. Exactly, Margot whispered. That's why it can never be revealed. But Charles's mind was already moving further. There's someone else trapped in this lie. My real mother. She's lived her life as a slave while I've lived as an heir. The Countess felt a shiver. His questions had turned into demands. Demands that hinted at something more dangerous than truth. Justice. In the weeks that followed, Charles began to act with chilling strategy. He approached Celeste directly. I know you're my mother, he told her quietly. And I know Marie lives in Savannah as a slave, while I live here with everything that should have been hers. Celeste had dreaded this moment for years, but hearing it spoken aloud left her stunned, because now the secret wasn't just being uncovered, it was being weaponized. What do you do when an 11-year-old boy suddenly becomes the most dangerous person in the room? Charles had uncovered the truth, and he wasn't just curious anymore. He was demanding justice, but his version of justice. It was brilliant and terrifying. Instead of blowing everything wide open, Charles proposed something almost unthinkable. He wanted to use his inheritance to secretly provide for both Celeste, his real mother, and Marie, his sister living as a slave. A hidden financial plan that would give them security without ever exposing the scandal publicly. It was bold. It was clever. And it put the Countess and Dr. Russo in a trap they couldn't escape. Either agree, or face total destruction. And the worst part? They knew he could prove everything. He had copies of Russo's journals, every payment, every medical note, every detail of the baby switch. The boy had flipped the entire game in his favor. The Countess, for all her calculation, now faced an opponent with the same sharp mind. But the ruthless honesty of youth. She realized she couldn't outmaneuver him. But Russo? He snapped. Already drowning in paranoia and whiskey, the doctor stormed into the Peton mansion one night, ranting like a man possessed. "The boy's a demon. He'll ruin us all." His hands shook, his breath stank of drink, and his eyes burned with desperation. Then came the chilling suggestion. An accident, a fall, a staged robbery in the garden. After all, children die tragically all the time. Who would question it? The Countess recoiled. But the idea was out there, poisoning the air. Meanwhile, Charles was moving pieces on his own, writing secret letters, digging for details about Marie. And word came back from Savannah that the Carrington family, and even outsiders, had started noticing. Marie wasn't like other enslaved children. Her education, her speech, her features, they screamed aristocracy. Questions were spreading, and that's when Russo made his move. One cold December evening, he waited in the shadows of the garden, pistol in hand. His plan was simple: end the boy before the boy ended them. But Charles was sharper than any adult gave him credit for. He sensed the ambush, and when Russo finally revealed himself, Charles faced him down without flinching. "I knew you'd try this," the boy said calmly. "But killing me won't save you. If I die, the truth dies with me." "Wrong. I've already hidden everything. My death guarantees exposure." It was a bluff, but one delivered with such icy confidence that Russo's nerve shattered. His hand trembled, the gun lowered, and in that moment the doctor realized he'd lost. To a child. But Charles didn't just win. He seized control. "You're unstable," he told Russo. "You're drinking. Your paranoia. Your threats. You're the real danger here. Maybe it's time you disappear." And within a week, Russo was gone. His practice sold. His excuses scribbled in a note. His presence erased from Charleston. The most dangerous piece of their conspiracy had been removed. Not by an adult, but by a boy. But here's the thing. Removing Russo was only the beginning, because bigger storms were coming. Abolitionists in the North had started asking questions about Marie. Her resemblance to European nobility was impossible to ignore. Her very existence was becoming a legal challenge, and those with resources far greater than Charles's would soon be digging for the truth. Then fate intervened again. In May of 1843, Colonel Peton suffered a devastating stroke. He was half paralyzed, unable to speak, leaving the estate in chaos. And Charles, now 12 years old, stepped into a world where he held more power than ever, and he was ready to use it, because Charles wasn't just trying to survive anymore. He was planning something far greater: freedom for his real family, revenge against the deception that had defined his life, and justice that would shake Charleston to its core. What happened next would decide everything: the inheritance, Marie's fate, and the legacy of the Peton family. What if the heir to one of Charleston's grandest estates wasn't who he claimed to be? By 1843, young Charles Peton was expected to start taking on adult duties, meeting lawyers, standing before judges, proving his pedigree. But instead of hiding the secret he'd uncovered, he used the moment to launch the boldest part of his plan. He went straight to Judge Samuel Thornberry, a trusted family friend, and asked for a private meeting. At first, the judge brushed it off, just nerves from a boy stepping into manhood. But then Charles laid out his case like a seasoned attorney: forged records, altered birth documents, medical notes that didn't add up, and finally, the shocking truth of a baby swap. The judge's face darkened. "These are serious accusations, Charles. If this is true, it could destroy your inheritance and bring criminal charges on your family." Charles didn't flinch. "I understand, but justice matters more than my comfort." And for the first time, the judge realized this boy wasn't bluffing. Charles asked him to open an official investigation, but not just any investigation. He wanted it structured in a way that would ruin the Peton reputation, while protecting Marie and Celeste from further harm. "You're asking me to help you tear down your own family," Thornberry said. "No," Charles replied. "I'm asking you to help me fix a wrong that's lasted 12 years. The judge agreed. But before the courts got involved, He insisted on one last attempt at private negotiation. That meeting took place in the Peton Mansion library, beneath portraits of ancestors whose stares seemed to mock the lies of the present. Colonel Peton lay upstairs half-conscious from a stroke while his world unraveled beneath him. "You've won," the Countess admitted, her voice heavy. "What happens now?" Charles didn't hesitate. "Marie comes home as my sister and receives her rightful share. Celeste gains her freedom and security. And you live with the consequences of your choices." The Countess's eyes narrowed. "And you? What happens when Charleston learns their heir is the son of a slave?" It was the one question Charles hadn't allowed himself to face. His whole mission had been about justice for others. But the truth would cost him everything too. "I'll face it," he said quietly. "Better that than living a lie." But the Countess had one more dagger left. "Have you thought about Marie? She spent 12 years believing she's a slave. Learning she was stolen at birth may not bring her joy. It may destroy her." That thought cut Charles deeper than he admitted. And as events moved forward, her warning would prove true. The legal wheels turned fast. Thornbury's inquiry confirmed everything: forged papers, altered records, and testimony from servants who remembered that stormy night in 1831. Marie was tracked down in Savannah and brought back under court protection. The reunion should have been joyful. Instead, it was raw and complicated. Marie was sharp, just like Charles, but she carried the weight of slavery's scars. Where Charles saw justice, Marie saw betrayal. "You stole 12 years from us both," she told the Countess in court. No amount of money can give that back. But her anger didn't stop there. She turned on Charles too. "Did you ever ask me if I wanted this?" she demanded. "You tore apart the only life I knew without even asking what I wanted. Was this for me, or was it for your revenge?" For the first time, Charles questioned his own motives. Was it justice or vengeance that had driven him? By September 1843, the judge's ruling came down. The truth was made official. Marie was freed and granted a share of the inheritance. Celeste gained her freedom and lifelong security. But the scandal shattered the Petons. Colonel Peton, paralyzed and broken, lived just long enough to watch 3 generations of legacy collapse. The Countess fled Charleston, retreating to a convent in France, her final letter admitting that her attempt to protect her children had instead destroyed them. And Charles? His victory came at the highest cost. Charleston society would never accept him as an heir. Despite the law, he was treated as an outcast. In 1844, he left the South behind. With his portion of the estate, he went north, studied law at Harvard, and built a career fighting for others trapped by America's twisted system of race and inheritance. He became a brilliant attorney, but a lonely one. He never married, never trusted, and in his private papers, found after his death, he wondered if his crusade had been about truth or revenge. Marie, meanwhile, carved out her own path. She married a free man in Philadelphia and used her inheritance to open schools for freed slaves. She found purpose, but never peace. Friends said she carried a bitterness that never left her. Celeste, against all odds, found the smoothest road. Her freedom and settlement allowed her to live respected in Charleston's free black community. She devoted her life to helping others navigate the system she once suffered under. But she too admitted the pain of never being able to embrace her son openly, or of knowing that every advantage Charles gained came at Marie's expense. The Peton mansion itself didn't survive either. By the mid-1800s, it was sold, abandoned, and eventually repurposed into a boarding house. In 1923, it was demolished, along with courthouse records that mysteriously vanished in a fire. Some whispered that descendants had arranged the destruction. No proof was ever found. Today, only a tiny marker remains, blandly noting legal disputes of inheritance at the site. No mention of swapped children. No whisper of a deadly pact. Just silence, but if you listen closely, the Peton scandal still speaks. A story of lies meant to protect, that instead destroyed. A reminder of how fragile identity really is when it rests on paper, power, and prejudice. So, what do you think? Was the Peton case unique? Or were there dozens more like it, buried by silence and shame? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if this story gripped you, hit like, share it with a friend who loves dark history, and subscribe. Because the next scandal I'll uncover may be even darker.